Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and I hope the week's gone well. It's certainly been a dramatic one. Let me start with a radio interview I did with Bruce Whitfield of Radio 702 about my concerns about coronavirus. They were twofold. One, it making landfall on the continent. And although we've only had one case in Egypt, I think the issue there is really the diagnosis. And therefore, I think there are plenty more incidents than have been reported. And also about the Chinese slowdown and the blowback effect on the African continent. Macro thoughts, what's going on in the currency markets is mad, bad, and very ugly, said Kit Jukes. Kit is at Societe Generale. It looks like huge capitulation by almost anyone who isn't a dollar bull. As I said severally, 27th of January, when the first indications were there that this virus was going to be much more virulent than was being reported, and I said investors dived into safe havens. Next week we could see these moves turn parabolic. And of course I was quoting one of my favorite writers, Thomas Pynchon. It is a curve each of them feels unmistakably. It is the parabola. They must have guessed, once or twice guessed, and refused to believe that everything always collectively had been moving toward that purified shape latent in the sky, that shape of no surprise, no second chance, no return. 13th of January, before the virus had hit, I was talking about the level of uncertainty that we were witnessing. That was on the occasion of the assassination of Soleimani. And I said, given that level of uncertainty I've outlined, gold looks well underpinned and might even have a banner year. Gold's near perfect storm of price supporting developments continues. This is from Ole S. Hansen. One of them being a fresh 7-year low in US 10-year real yields at negative 0.15%. Using FIBO extension, the next major target looks like 1690, with some local resistance here at 1632, and we've popped above that already. Gold itself is now at 1634. Precious metals, this was before this further 1% surge over the last 24 hours, are outperforming other commodities by the most on record this year. This is via Lisa Abramovitz. The most important currency to watch is the renminbi. I wrote on the 13th of August, and Raoul, GMI, the renminbi is about to break 2, he tweeted, and currently we're at 7, we're just at 705. I've written in September last year about the China EM frontier feedback loop phenomenon. And in that I should have added Asia. I said this phenomenon was positive for the last 2 decades, but has now undergone a trend reversal. The fallout, I said, is being experienced as far away as Germany. The Rand is the purest proxy for this phenomenon. African countries heavily dependent on China being the main taker are also at the bleeding edge of this phenomenon. The pressure point will not ease soon, but will continue to intensify. Home Thoughts, Nairobi City from Karura Forest Plain. Awesome photo by Ganam Sami via Kenya Pics. I return to William S. Burroughs. Paranoid is someone who knows a little of what's going on. Ukrainians protest against coronavirus quarantine hospital in their town. We could see a lot more of this going forward. And previously I'd written, there is certainly a fin de siècle, even apocalyptic mood afoot. This is a photograph of the compassionate future Buddha, Avalokitesvara, in teaching position, awaiting the rebirth when the last person who remembers the Buddha's Dharma will pass away. That's from William Dalrymple. And that pose made me think of the sentence, it certainly feels like a decade of semiotic arousal, when everything, it seemed, was a sign, a harbinger of some future radical disjuncture or cataclysmic upheaval. To wit, poisoning or mass electrocution, dozens of birds dropped dead on motorway in Spain, in apocalyptic scene. That's from Sputnik. This is a photograph of the Indus from the Delhi gate of Attock Fort, William Dalrymple again. And the first meditation of Siddhartha under the rose apple tree. On the pedestal is a fire altar and Zoroastrian worshippers. 2nd century, Dalrymple again. Political reflections, good morning. This is my 11th trip to Syria since 2012. Mr. Morandi, rather attractive scene. Russian Su-24 fighter jets today destroyed a Turkish tank, 11 other military vehicles, including armored personnel carriers in Kamina, Sarmin, in the Idlib region of Syria. Turkish soldiers and dozens of al-Nusra al-Qaeda fighters. This was after a Turkish unit fired on a Russian jet. I can't help feeling Erdogan is very overstretched and a little bit like a rat in a cheese trap in Syria. And, he's actually, it's a sovereign country. He's moved in there, he needs to get out, and he's got a lot of assets, however, 30,000 it's estimated in Idlib. Today's official China coronavirus figures: infected 75,567, dead 2,239. That's around 120 new deaths. There were 200 extra infections from a prison in Shandong Province. That's from Stephen McDonald. But these numbers have been rejigged, recalibrated, and then, of course, if one goes back 2 weeks to that 10-cent leak, the real numbers might well be 10x. The odds of containment look vanishingly small, but not quite yet zero. Dr. Tom Frieden, I tend to subscribe to that perspective. Mini outbreaks of coronavirus in Beijing heighten fears. Clusters detected at 2 hospitals. Infection density in the district is just lower than Wuhan. That's not a good sign. Only Yuan TV. Of course, Beijing is the capital and home to government offices like the Finance Ministry, Central Bank, and financial institutions. Now, I follow a lady called Helen Branswell, and she tweeted, "How the hell did no one in Geneva at whose briefing ask about China's vacillating approach to confirming cases of the coronavirus?" And then Dr. Eric Ding, sometimes when top coronavirus reporters start shouting, "How the hell?" to get answers about China's ever-changing case definition, it's a serious problem. I take you back to Jeff's NZ Views, who says to only believe their facts to avoid misinformation and coronavirus. What are these facts, he asked. Jan 20, no person-to-person transmission. Jan 30, person-to-person transmission confirmed. Jan 26, it's not airborne. Feb 10, airborne confirmed. Jan 15, hard to catch. February 2nd, more virulent than SARS confirmed. Groucho Marx, who you going to believe, me or your own eyes? And this is a working lunch of WHO experts in China. What can they find out about coronavirus there? Asked Jennifer AT&TD. And this is the fact that only now have they been sent, or is it admitted, into China. And they are nowhere near the epicenter. They're in a rather nice hotel. How nice for them. The industrially necessary Dr. Tedros, this was the article by Epsilon Theory. The truth is that only now, 2 months into the epidemic, is WHO sending a team to start investigating the virus. On February 4, Dr. Tedros, we call on all countries to implement decisions that are evidence-based and consistent. Roger that. The evidence here taken without adjustment or question from the CCP was a bald-faced lie. Will this disease spread further and faster? Will more people die? Because Director General Tedros recommended as best practice on February 4 that flights and visa issuance in and out of China continue without significant disruption. Yes, I think so. Then he's complaining about fake news. WHO was talking about infodemics. And then he's saying basically fake news is now defined as anything that disputes WHO data, which means that fake news is now defined as anything that disputes the official China party line. Where possible, China wants to criminalize any speech, any social media that does not follow the official party line. Where it's not possible to criminalize that speech, China wants to ban it through the cooperative censorship of global tech and media platforms. Where it's not possible to ban that speech, China wants to shame it into the shadows by getting us to reject it as fake news. What is happening at the most senior levels of the World Health Organization is not just a disgrace, Epsilon Theory. It is not just a humiliation for the people who are doing good work and important work. It's a betrayal of the entire world. Yesterday, the case count in South Korea went from 31 to 51 in a single jump. Today it is 82. This is fast growth, faster than Singapore or Japan have reported. Helen Branswell. I've written about it severally, but the last article I was quoting this Chinese poet, Bei Dao. Let me tell you, world, I do not believe. If 1,000 challenges lie beneath your feet, count me as number 1,001. I don't believe the sky is blue. I don't believe in thunder's echoes. I don't believe that dreams are false. I don't believe that death has no revenge. The day when China announces negative numbers of new infections is not far away. Ministry of Truth, 1984. And that's a good point from G.R. Gunter. Bianco Research had a discussion on Twitter, and I agreed with him that we need to look at evacuee ex-China infection rate of this coronavirus. And he posted the total confirmed cases outside China this morning. Looks like we might have another Wuhan outside of China, the South Korean city of Daegu, population 2.5 million, has reported 73 new cases in the last 2 days. Authorities have told everybody to stay indoors. I take you back to TVRB a few days ago, who said, we believe that international seeding events started to occur in mid-January. Thus, we have a critical 10 weeks from then to late March to contain these nascent outbreaks before they become sizable. Coronavirus ex-China, this was a little bit earlier than the report from Bianco Research, from Jody Graphics 15, a good visual presentation. Malcolm Gladwell spoke of the tipping point, the moment in an epidemic when a virus reaches critical mass. It's the boiling point, it's the moment on the graph when the line starts to shoot straight upwards. In an article in 2014 about Ebola, I called it the moment of escape velocity and wrote then, viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. This was an interesting article in Asia Times, has extensive experience at silencing viral ideas, but controlling an actual virus itself is outside his experience. So at the very least, we can say he appears to be playing a high-risk game. As I said on the occasion of the 70th celebration of the Chinese Communist Party, the world in the 21st century exhibits viral, wildfire, and exponential characteristics and feedback loops which only become obvious in hindsight. I also added a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine in point of fact. This is an empty airport, Shanghai, via Klopstock. World Bank issued a pandemic bond, which is under selling pressure as the coronavirus spreads. The World Bank's two so-called pandemic bonds came under scrutiny after the second worst Ebola outbreak on record. The 2018 epidemic in the DR Congo raged for about a year and killed more than 2,000 people, but it failed to trigger the release of funds to help affected countries because the release of funds was driven by the number of countries which were affected. With the coronavirus outbreak having infected more than 74,000 people and claimed more than 2,000 lives, prices for the IBRD pandemic bond, with the highest investment risk, the Class B notes, have come under increasing pressure. Losses to investors depend on the number of deaths and geographical spread. In the most extreme case, a global outbreak defined as more than 2,500 deaths across more than 8 countries with a certain number of fatalities in each country will wipe out the bondholder's entire investment. Offer prices quoted by one broker have slipped as low as 45 cents on the dollar, while another is quoting 62.5 cents, market sources said. In the midst of the 2018 Ebola outbreak, the bond traded at a little more than 70 cents. Both of the bonds are often closely held and largely liquid. Filings show that the riskiest of the two, maturing on June 15, is held by asset managers including Bailey Gifford, Amundi and Oppenheimer. It was an ideology-driven idea to get the private sector involved in humanitarian and emergency finance, and I have to say that this has failed. Let's move on to the markets, which have been very dynamic of late. Start with the euro. The euro is currently at 107.92. Dollar index at 99.834. Japanese yen rebounding 111.57. Swiss franc 0.9834. The pound 128.93. The Australian dollar 0.6589 under huge selling pressure. India rupee 71.962. South Korean won 1209.48. The rial 439.37. Egyptian pound 15.55. And the South African rand is at 15.13. And I'm very bearish about the rand. In Europe, the euro is at the biggest level of its life, says Raoul. And I think parity is indeed calling on the euro. Commodity markets, crude oil, $53.20. It had this big counter-trend rebound, which is going to fall apart. Emerging markets and the global slowdown in trade, especially with China, is even hitting Brazil. The big level is gone, says Raul, and this is the China EM frontier feedback loop phenomenon, which includes Brazil. Sub-Saharan Africa, Secretary Pompeo completes his visit to Africa. How would one characterize the US's current policy toward the African continent? This is Howard French being interviewed by Gude Moore. It's a podcast on CG Dev worth listening to. Looted 18th century crown is returned to Ethiopia. A rare and looted crown from the 18th century was returned to Ethiopia on Thursday after it was discovered in the Netherlands 2 decades ago. The Dutch government facilitated the handover with the belief that it has a duty to restitute this important artifact back to Ethiopia, the office of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said, sharing photos of a smiling Abiy holding the ceremonial crown. Dutch government in a statement Thursday said the crown was the property of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. It said the crown went missing from the Holy Trinity Church in the village of Chelekot. Lesotho Premier to quit amid probe into ex-spouse's murder. You can't make this story up. Prime Minister Thomas Thabane announced he will resign by the end of July, yielding to pressure from his ruling party to quit after his current wife was charged with murdering his ex-spouse. Thabane offered to leave office earlier if all the requisite preparations for my retirement are completed. The Premier himself may be charged in the case, Reuters reported. Lesotho is a nation of 3 million people that's encircled by South Africa and has been riven by political turbulence and military coups since 1986. Opposition riots in 1998 prompted its neighbour to deploy troops to restore order. In 2014, Thabane temporarily fled the country after accusing the military of overthrowing him. Thabane's departure is unlikely to bring an end to political instability, and the odds are rising that the military could step in once again. Now, The Lancet has a very in-depth article on the preparedness and vulnerability of African countries against importations of the coronavirus, a modelling study. They are saying the epidemic has spread from China to 25 countries. Local cycles of transmission have already occurred in 12 countries after case importation. In Africa, Egypt has so far confirmed 1 case. They use data on the volume of air travel departing from airports in the infected provinces in China and directed to Africa to estimate the risk of importation per country. Countries with the highest importation risk are Egypt, Algeria, and South Africa, and they have moderate to high capacity to respond to outbreaks. Countries of moderate risk, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Sudan, Angola, Tanzania, Ghana, and Kenya, have variable capacity and high vulnerability. Africa confirmed its first case in Egypt on February 14, 2020. China is Africa's leading commercial partner, thus there are large travel volumes through which severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2, could reach the continent. Figure 2 is the global distribution of importation risk over human population density, distribution of the SPA capacity, and IDVI. And figure 3 is importation risk as a function of the SPA capacity and IDVI in Africa, again from The Lancet. Nature concerns arising about the virus's potential to circulate undetected in Africa and Asia. And this is the problem. The continent has gone from having only 2 labs with the capacity to confirm the virus, 1 in Senegal and 1 in South Africa, to now having at least 8, according to WHO. 3 of the newly added labs are in Nigeria, This is the Director General of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, who says the worst case scenario for Nigeria will be if an infected person goes undetected and begins to infect others. That is really what keeps me up at night, he said. Bill Gates, this disease, when it comes to Africa, will be more dramatic than in China, and I don't want to downplay what is happening in China, he said. Of course, I wrote about what he was saying on the 27th of January when he kept telling us a pandemic was coming. In October 29, he ran a simulation of a coronavirus pandemic. Just 3 months later, the real coronavirus pandemic begins. He warned of 10 million deaths as the virus spreads to Africa. This is a huge challenge. We've always known the potential for a naturally caused or intentionally caused pandemic is one of the few things that could disrupt health systems and economies and cause more than 10 million excess deaths. Ebola is terrible, but it's not like a lightning flu, he said. Listen to his footage where he says either naturally caused or intentionally caused. As I said on the 27th of January, I have to assume that the coronavirus is already in Africa, but just not diagnosed. That's a racing certainty. I came across a short video from DW News via Melissa K. Chan, Discrimination against ethnic Chinese in Africa because of the coronavirus, including against those who've been in South Africa for 4 generations. It's a sad story, and I appreciate that there is a degree of racism in this matter. It's unfortunate. But, we're dealing with something that's non-linear and exponential, and I think it's already achieved escape velocity. Within Africa, Egypt, South Africa, Ethiopia, Mauritius, Morocco, Nigeria, and Kenya topped the list. That was according to the University of Southampton's World Population Project. 3rd of February, I said Bole, which is the airport in Addis Ababa, is the epicenter of China-Africa connectedness. Zero Hedge says this could mean super spreaders during the incubation period, undetected by temperature readings or showing no symptoms, likely invaded Africa from China via Ethiopia's main airport. Bole Airport is the leading African gateway to and from China. On average, 1,500 passengers per day arrive from China. Ethiopia scans all passengers from Asia for symptoms, which essentially means taking their temperature. And as the professor at the University of Minnesota School of Public Health, I don't think airport temperature checks have any major effect on stopping or even slowing down transmission. South African All Shares up 1.24% year to date. Dollar Rand, I think we're going to 15.50. Egyptian Pound remains firm at 15.55. EGX 30 down 1.73% year to date. Nigerian All Share up 2.71% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange down 1.78% year to date. About 1 in 5 cigarettes smoked in Uganda is counterfeit, according to BAT's local unit. BAT Kenya reported results. I spoke about that yesterday. Earnings per share was down 4.896%. They spoke of a high incidence of illicit trade of 11.3%. Kenya is training its youth with exercises to fight its locust problem. This is the worst locust outbreak that parts of East Africa have seen in 70 years. Quick take. Safaricom is to consider Huawei as a supplier for its 5G network. This is Reuters. We will use Huawei in 5G. What we will do in terms of the American statements about not using Huawei, we don't have that situation in Africa. Acting CEO Michael Joseph said Safaricom will follow guidelines from its 2 main shareholders, Vodacom and Vodafone. There is demand for more and more bandwidth, more and more speed, he said, adding that 5G services network would first be offered to customers in major cities where demand was highest. Just in case anyone in Washington isn't 100% clear on the position of Africa's largest telecom operators regarding what it thinks of US calls to abandon Huawei for its 5G rollout in Kenya, Eric Olander put up this. I wrote about this on the 10th of December 2018 when I said how Huawei plays out in Africa is now an above-the-radar issue. Safaricom share price data is there. Sanlam reported full-year profit before tax was up posted 550 million shillings. Gross written premium was up 10.176%. Investment income up 7.625%. Profit and loss up. They reported a loss of 2.129 billion the year before. The profit is 550. They took some big hits in the corporate bond market. Earnings per share was 79 cents versus a loss of 14 shillings last time. They turned it around. Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act 2018 declared constitutional according to MIR. If you make a false statement, e.g. Jubilee is corrupt and it's deemed likely to cause violence, you may be imprisoned for 10 years. People with Twitter accounts with Tusker pictures can be jailed for 2 years. Kenya's average cost of land per acre, this is an interesting graphic from Black Orwa via Kennedy Kai. Nairobi West joins the cluster of high-demand commercial areas, shows you the cost of land in Lavington. Lamu is the same as Karen, apparently. Cheapest land in Nairobi is in Ruai. Look at this Kenya Airways pilot manoeuvring his landing at Heathrow Airport. Pretty incredible. Nairobi All Share is down 4.53% year to date. NSE20 is down 4.99% year to date. I wish you a wonderful weekend.